Up to this point in the videos, you should have an app that displays a list and the layout for an input field for the user to enter a new task and a button to let the user actually add the task to the list. However, the button in the app doesn't do anything just yet, so that's where we're going to start by working on in this video. After we have implemented letting the user add a task to the list, we'll then implement letting the user delete a task. And finally, we're going to look at how to persist the list of tasks so that the user can still see the list of tasks after the app is relaunched. So let's go back to Android Studio and start implementing some of these features. So back in Android Studio, I have my main activity open, and you'll remember this is the activity that's in charge of the main screen in our app. So our first task is to set up the button and input field so that the user can enter a task. And what this means is right now the user can type something here. They could type, for example, read a book, and they could click add. But when they click add, nothing is happening right now. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set an on-click listener for this button so that we can detect when the user actually clicks on this button. If you remember, the main activity is associated with the layout activity_main. And in activity_main, what we have so far is we have a button, and the ID of the button is just button. And then we also have an edit text field, and this is the field where the user can actually input some text. And the ID for our edit text field is add task field. So what we have to do is we have to register when the user clicks on this button, and then take whatever input they have typed into the add task field and add it to our list of items. So let's go ahead and start by doing that. And if you remember, in one of our previous videos, we already tested that our button actually works with the commented out code. And first we had to find the button by its ID and then send an on-click listener to it. So let's do the same thing here. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing a reference to the button, and then we're setting an on-click listener to it. Once the user clicks on the button, what we want to do is first we need to grab the text that the user has inputted into the edit text field. And if we look back at the activity_main, the edit text field has an ID of add task field. Once we grab that text, we then need to add the string to our list of tasks. And our list of tasks was defined up here. So we need to add the string to list of tasks. And then one extra thing we could do is once the user actually inputs a new task, we can then kind of clear out this field for them so that it can be reset and they can enter a new task very easily. So those are the three things we're trying to do. So the first thing we want to do is grab the text that the user has inputted into the edit text field, which has the ID of add task field. So let's do that first. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing a reference to the input text field, and then we're getting the text of whatever is in here, and then we're turning that to a string, because just grabbing the text actually gives us back an editable object, and editable is not a string that we can add to our list of tasks, so we have to turn it into a string by calling the toString method. So once we've done this, we need to actually add the string, the user inputted task, to our list of tasks. Once we've added this new string to our list of tasks, we actually have to notify the adapter that something within our data set has changed. So the way we do that is, let's first write comment to say what we're doing, notify the data adapter that our data has been updated. And the way we do that is by calling notify adapter notify item selected or notify item inserted. And we want to insert this item at the very end of the list. So we're specifically telling the adapter which part of the data set has changed. And since we're adding an item to the end of the list here, it's going to be the size of the tasks -1 because the array starts at index 0 instead of 1. So without calling the adapter and telling it that our underlying data set has changed, the list of tasks itself would have added a new string. But what's going to happen is if the adapter doesn't know that this new string was added, what we see in this recycler view actually won't be updated. So this line is very important in order to tell the adapter that something has changed and it needs to update itself again. The next thing is we want to reset the text field. So let's just run our code right now and see if what we have so far works. So let's go ahead and run our app, and hopefully this time when we enter a new string into the input text field and then click on the button, then we can actually see our task added to the list. So we have our pre-created list here, so now let's add a new task. And let's click add. And there you see, now what we have is every time we enter a new task, it's added to the end of the list here. So for example, if we add a new task, see again that it's added to the end of the list here. But one improvement we can make is we can clear out this text field right after the user has added a task, so that it's very easy for them to enter a new task instead of having to press the backspace button a bunch of times in order to clear out the last task. So that's the next thing we're going to try to do here. So again, in order to get a reference to this input text field, we have to use find view by ID, similar to what we did here. And then we have to set the text equal to an empty string. And you notice we're doing two of the same exact calls here, two find view by IDs where we're finding the same exact view. And that's not the most efficient thing possible. So we can actually make this a little bit more efficient by taking this find view by ID out of this on click listener so that we have a reference to this view outside. So the way we do that is we can copy this line of code, create a variable for it, and just use this variable down here so we don't have to make multiple calls of find view by ID. All right, so let's give this one more try. So now you see every time we enter a new task, the input field here is automatically reset so the user can very easily add another task right after it. All right, so that concludes us implementing the feature of adding a task to the field, adding a task to the list. And because our layout was already set up for us in the beginning, it was pretty simple. And what we had to do was set it on click listener for the button, grab the text that the user has inputted. So get the view that is the input field here, grab the string that's inside the input field, turn it into a string. Once we have the string that we want to add to our list, we add it to our original list of tasks. And then we have to notify our adapter that our underlying data set has changed. And finally, just to make a small user experience improvement, we decided to reset the text field after the user has clicked on this button to enter a new task so that they can more easily enter a next task. So now that we've implemented adding tasks, we're going to actually try deleting tasks now. So that's the next thing we're going to try. We're going to try to implement a new feature where if the user long clicks on a specific item in the list, we want to let them delete that specific item from the list. So let's take a look how we could do that. So in order to do that, we're going to have to go into the task item adapter. The task item adapter, you remember, is the bridge that tells our recycler view how to display the data that we give it. And this is also where we're going to be setting a long click listener for every single item so that when the user long clicks on an item, we remove that item from the list. So if you scroll down to the bottom where we had first created our view holder, you remember that the view holder is supposed to provide a reference to each of the views within the data item. And this is where we actually also use this specific class to cache views inside the layout for fast access. So this is also where we're going to be able to set a specific long click listener for each item in the list. So you'll notice that for the view holder, what we're passing in is item view. An item view in this case just stands for basically the entire view of a single item in this layout. So every single row in this recycler view is an item view. And if we want to set a click listener or a long click listener for every single view, for every single row inside this list, well, we could just set a click listener or a long click listener for on item view. So let's go ahead and start by testing that out. So item view is referencing the entire row inside this recycler view. And what we want to do is we want to set a long click listener. So similar to how we set an on click listener for specific buttons and text fields in other types of views, we could also set a long click listener. So a long click listener is, as you might imagine, similar to a click listener, except the user has to click a little longer in order for Android to register it as a long click listener. The interesting about setting on click listener is you actually have to return true or false to tell Android whether you handled the specific input event. And the best way to do this is just to return true for now. That will get rid of the error. But something interesting we could do just to make sure that our long click listener is actually working is we could try by printing out a log statement. So let's try that. And the cool thing about this adapter is we could also have a direct reference to the specific item that was clicked with something called the adapter position. So we could even say which specific item we clicked on by calling this variable that's already defined for us called the adapter position. So let's go ahead and run this just to make sure that our long click listener works for every item. So if I long click on this do laundry, and then if I open up Logcat, you can see here in my logs, I'm gonna clear out and long click on an item again just to make it more clear. So if I long click on this first item, I get a log statement saying long click on item 0. And if I long click on the second item, I get a message that say I long clicked on the second. Okay, so now at least we know that our long click listener works. And the next thing is to do something interesting with this long click listener. Just printing out a log message is cool, but it's not very useful. So in order to actually do something interesting for this long click listener, we need to actually pass in a defined long click listener into our adapter so that we can control from our main activity what happens when the long click happens. Because if you'll remember, list of tasks here was actually defined in our main activity. So in order to remove items from this list of tasks, all the logic has to happen in this main activity. The task item adapter only holds a reference to this list of items. So we can't directly change what the data set is through our adapter. We want to change it through our main activity. So in order to actually change what's the data inside the list of tasks by deleting it, if the user wants to long click on an item to delete it, we have to create a long click listener inside our main activity and pass it into our task item adapter. The easiest way to do that is to start by creating an interface that we can then define in our main activity. So the first thing we need to do is create an interface called onLongClickListener here in our adapter. And this interface is meant to be implemented inside our main activity with just one function. What does this long click listener need to do when a long click is registered? So we want to define just one function inside onLongClickListener. And this one function is just going to let us define what happens when a specific item is clicked. And we need to know which specific number or which specific item we clicked on, so we also need to pass in the position of the item. Because if the user clicks on, for example, the first item, we don't want to delete the second item in the list. We need to know that the user clicked on a specific first item, and we need to delete the first item in the list. So this method of onItem long clicked also needs to be passed in a position of which item was specifically long clicked. So once we have this interface defined, what we need to do is actually in our adapter also let the constructor take in a long click listener. So here we're letting whoever creates a new task item adapter to both pass us a list of items and also a long click listener that we can then use down here. So instead of saying, okay, just print out a log statement when an item is long clicked, what we actually want to do is call the long click listener that was passed in and call the specific method on item long clicked with the adapter position to know which specific item was long clicked. What this will do is once an item is long clicked, it's going to look at the long click listener that was passed in and call the on item long clicked method along with the adapter position, which is the item that was specifically clicked. So now that we have all this defined, we have the interface defined, and we have specifically added a new parameter to our constructor so that when a task item adapter is created, the user can also define a long click listener. Now in our main activity, you might notice that there's now an error here. There's an error where we define our adapter because instead of just passing in a list of tasks now, we also have to pass in a long click listener. So let's go ahead and actually start creating this long click listener. So inside our onCreate, at the very top here, I'm going to create a new variable to hold my long click listener. And this variable is going to implement that interface that we just created. So if you just say, hey, I'm going to create a new variable that implements on long click listener, Android Studio is going to say, hey, you have an error because on long click listener actually requires you to implement the specific method on item long clicked. So it's not going to let you do this just off the bat. An easy way to do this is if you hover over the actual error and you click on implement members, and you'll see the exact methods that you have to implement in order to implement this interface. You click on the specific method and you just click OK, and the code is automatically generated for you. So what we have here now is we have a variable that holds a long click listener that we create, and now we could actually define what we want to happen when the item is long clicked. So when a specific item is long clicked, we basically want to, one, remove the item from the list, and then again, because the underlying data set has changed, we need to then notify the adapter that something has changed. And that should be it. So in order to remove the item from the list, we're already passing the position. So it'll be pretty simple. We just have to take our list of tasks and remove the specific item at the position that was passed in. And then finally, we have to notify our adapter that our data set has changed. And you realize right now, let's see, our adapter, so our adapter is defined down here. Which means we can't access it all the way up here. So an easy way to kind of get over this is we can create a variable outside of onCreate for our task item adapter. And then instead of creating it down here, we could just say we're going to actually create it here. And you'll notice there is an error here. And if you hover over it, Android Studio is going to complain that the specific variable you created hasn't been initialized, and in order to get over this specific error, we could add a late init keyword to the variable. This just tells Kotlin that we're going to eventually assign something to this variable. It's just going to be a little later. So we're going to initialize this variable later, and we're initializing this in onCreate. So what we did is we created a variable for the adapter. We gave it a late init keyword to tell Kotlin we're going to initialize it later. And then instead of creating the adapter down here, we took away the creation which was previously of a value here. We took that away so that we can actually initialize the adapter that we had created up here. So once we have that, I think we're good to go. We have to tell the adapter that data set has changed. So back in our on item long click, we have to notify the adapter that something has changed because we had changed the underlying data set. And then finally, in order to get rid of this error here, we need to pass in the on long click listener we created up there. All right, so if we review everything we did, the first thing we did was we set an on click listener for every single item inside the recycler view. And in order to do something interesting for when an item is long clicked, we had to allow the adapter to actually take in a long click listener in its constructor. And in order to do that, we had to create a new interface for a long click listener with the specific method that we want implementers to implement on item long clicked. And then back in our main activity, we had to actually create the long click listener to say what we want happen when an item is long clicked, and specifically want to remove an item from the list of tasks. And then we needed to notify the adapter that our data set has changed. And then finally, in our task item adapter, instead of just passing in a list of tasks, we also had to pass in the on long click listener. So hopefully when I relaunch my app now, I can long click on an item and see it go away because it was deleted from our data set. So let's go ahead and try that out. All right, so I have 2 items in this list right now. Let's just add one more for fun. And let's try long clicking on one of the items. I'm going to try long clicking on the second item. And long clicking on it, it just made it go away. You'll realize that clicking on something doesn't exactly delete it, but long clicking on it does make it go away. Great, so that was our second feature that we wanted to implement, which is let the user delete an item from the list based on a long click action. The last thing we want to do is you'll realize if you kind of close out this app and then relaunch it, nothing in the app is saved. So every time we launch the app, no matter what we had done, no matter what we did to the app beforehand, we're always starting with the fresh new state of the same 2 tasks that we have pre-populated. Whatever the user inputted or deleted has not been saved or persisted, and that's not the most interesting app. So the last thing we're going to do is actually implement saving whatever the user has done to the list, adding new tasks or deleting new tasks, and allow it so that every time the app is relaunched, the same list of tasks are shown again instead of just the 2 tasks that we pre-populated the list with. So that's what we're going to work on next. So for this specific assignment, to save the data, we're going to use a file. We're going to write everything that's part of our app into a file to save it as part of the file, and everything in the file we're going to read out to figure out what we had saved as our app before. There's other ways to save data in Android apps, and we're going to learn about those other ways in future assignments. But for the first assignment, we're going to try to keep things simple and just save our data to a file that we can then read and write into. All right, so in order to work with files in Android, the first thing we need to do is actually add a dependency that allows us to use a library that more easily lets us read and write to files. So in your little left navigation bar here, you want to make sure you're in the Android specific view for a project structure. That way you'll see the project structure similar to how I'm seeing it here, and then you can find the correct files. I'm going to open up the Gradle scripts directory, and I want to click on the second build.gradle. So you realize there's 2 different build.gradles. One is the more general one that's for your bigger project in general, and one is for just your specific app, the module build.gradle. So you want to click on the second build.gradle here. If you click on this, you'll notice that there's a bunch of dependencies that were already declared at the very bottom of the file. So I'm at the very bottom of the file, and these dependencies that are declared down here are basically our way of saying, hey, these are all the libraries that we want to pull in order to make our lives as developers easier, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just pull in libraries so that we could easily use functions in order to get what we need to get done faster. So the specific dependency we're going to use in order to read and write from files is going to be called the commons IO. IO stands for input output. So we're going to add this specific dependency. This is the line I've added here. The specific package I want to add is the commons IO one, and the 2.11.0 just stands for the version that I want to use. 2.11.0 is the newest version of the package right now. And I'm going to click sync now so that Gradle can pull in this dependency that I now need. So once I do that, I can actually start working with reading and writing files. And most of the reading and writing of files we're going to do is going to happen inside our main activity. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse the left-hand navigation bar. I'm going to go back to main activity, and this is where all the magic is going to happen. So we actually need to do a few things in order to save the data. So what we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to save the data that the user has inputted. Because right now, if the user restarts the app, then all the data, all the tasks that they have inputted before is going to go away. All the tasks they have deleted before is going to go away. The only task they'll ever see every time they launch the app is the ones we added before previously by hard coding. So that's not very interesting. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually be able to create a method to get the data file we need. And just to add one more comment, we're saving this data by writing and reading from a file. So this is our main goal here. We want to save the data that the user has inputted, and we're doing it by reading and writing from a specific file. So first we need to create a method to actually get the file that we need. Once we have this method to actually get the file, this is going to be our main source of truth. We need another method to load the items by reading every line in our file. So this is the specific method that's going to load our items. If we have a method that loads our items, we also need a method to save all our items. And saving items is going to be equivalent to writing things to a file. All right, so let's start by actually implementing something that will get us the file that we need. The first thing we need is we need to get the file that we need. And this could just be any file that we create right now. It could be any name. But the easiest way to do that is let's start by just defining a function that will get our data file. And this get data file, the main idea of this get data file method is it just returns us the file in our Android phone that stores everything we have. And you can name your file anything, but I'm going to name it data.txt, and that stands for a text file that's going to save all the data, which is basically going to be the list of tasks. And in order to actually use this file class, I had to import this java.io file. So make sure you have this java.io file imported in order to actually use this class. So before, if I take out this import, you'll realize there's an error here, and if you kind of click on it, Android Studio will prompt you to actually import the java.io file. And I had a shortcut saved in order to import it, but once I hit that shortcut, what I had was this extra line here to import that specific java.io, that file class that I can now use here. So now I have a method to actually get the file I need. The next thing I need is to load all the items by reading every line in the data file. And of course, this file is going to be empty, which is going to be okay. But the easiest way in order to do this is, you'll remember, we had our list of tasks defined up here. And then we started it off by making it just an empty list that we can then add things to. And then we started by populating it with some hard-coded tasks. This isn't very interesting. It'd be more interesting if our list of tasks was initialized by actually reading every line in the file. So in this file, every line is going to represent a specific task in our list of tasks. So what we're trying to do in this file is we want to save every single item that's in this list as a specific line. And then, so when we save the file, save every item, we just write every line as if it's a single task. And then we can read every line as a single task when we load the items. So let's actually start by saving items, because that might make more sense. Let's start by defining our function, save items. And this one is going to be load items. So save items is just going to take everything that's already in a list of tasks and write it to our file. So we're going to use the file utils class. And you want to make sure you're using the file utils from the commons.io library, which is the library we imported in our build.gradle file a little earlier. So we want this one. And then we want to write lines. You want to write lines into this specific data file that we created up here. So we're going to call get data file. And inside this file, we basically want to write everything that was added to our list of tasks. And because this is a file function, it would be safer if we surrounded this with a try catch exception if something goes wrong with the file. So for example, if we can't find this file, if this file doesn't exist, we want to be able to catch it. If we don't catch this exception, then our app might just crash and we might not know why. And in order to actually know why something went wrong, let's actually print out this IO exception. I don't expect this IO exception to be caught, but this is just for a safeguard trace. So what I'm doing here in save items is I'm using the file utils class to write all the list of tasks into our data file, which we defined up here. And each task is going to be represented as a new line. That's what the write lines method is doing. And I'm surrounding it with a catch block just in case something goes wrong with our file, if it doesn't exist or if it's corrupted, we want to make sure to surround it with a try-catch block so that our app doesn't just crash. So that's our save items method. In our load items method, what we want to do is read every line in the data file and populate it to list of tasks. Because in save items, we got the list of tasks and we wrote every single line into our file. In the load items, we want to basically read every line inside our file. So the way to do that is, up here we were defining list of tasks to be an empty list, and then we were adding it with our hard-coded tasks here. So I'm actually going to take out this hard-coded tasks because that's not going to be very interesting anymore, and we don't need it anymore now that we can actually read from a file for our list of tasks. So I'm going to take out those 2 lines. In the back end load items, I'm going to populate a list of tasks to be equal to whatever is in our file. So the way I do that is by using the file utils class. I'm going to call read lines, and the specific file I want to read the lines from is going to be this file here. So I have a handy method to actually just get that file. And then I need to tell file utils how specifically to read this file. So I'm going to say define it by using this character set. And then again, because we're working with a list of tasks here. Oh, and now we have a little error here, and it says that because the list of tasks is a value and not a variable, it cannot be reassigned. So values are variables that you're never going to change again. And because we made this specific variable a value, we can't reassign it again. But if we made this a variable instead of value, then the error will go away because variables can be reassigned versus values cannot be reassigned. So we had to change this from a value to a variable in order to let us reassign list of tasks to whatever the file reads from. And again, because this is dealing with file input and output, I want to surround this with a try-catch block just in case something goes wrong. For example, the file doesn't exist. If the file doesn't exist, I don't want a list of tasks to just be empty. So actually, if the file doesn't exist, it would make sense for the list of tasks to be empty. So I'm going to keep this here, but I want to print out the stack trace. Just like that. And so now we have our load items method, and we have our save items method, and we also created this handy get data file method that basically just returns us the file where we saved everything from so that we can read and write to it. And now the last thing is we want to figure out where we're going to call these load items and save items, right? So when should we actually load these items and when should we save these items? Well, we should probably save these items when the user actually adds a task. So whenever the user, enters some field, some string into this input field and then clicks this button, we want to save the task because here in the list of tasks, we're adding to the list of tasks. So we also wanted to save it to the file. So let's call load save items here. And I think that should be, and also when we delete an item, so when the user long clicks on a specific item in our long click listener, you'll remember that we also remove stuff from the list of tasks. So after our adapter is notified, we also want to save the items. So these changes are also persisted in the file. And then now we need to figure out when we want to call load items. So load items, I think would make sense right after we have created our long click listener. And right before we actually create our recycler view, it makes sense to populate our list of items. So I think previously what we had here before was the 2 lines where we're hard coding the 2 tasks. Instead of actually hard coding the 2 tasks and manually adding it to our list of tasks, now we want to actually load items. And what load items is going to do is populate list of tasks by reading whatever is inside our file. So let's go ahead and run an app. And now if I run my app, what I expect is I don't expect to see these 2 hard-coded tasks anymore because I took that out. But because this is the first time I'm creating this file, it should be an empty list. So let's try that. All right, so we're at a good start because we don't see anything in our list anymore. But now let's start adding some tasks and see if these tasks are persistent after we relaunch our app. So let's add task, read a book, make dinner, walk the dog. So now we've added 3 tasks. I'm going to relaunch my app and hopefully the 3 tasks will still be there. Perfect. So now our 3 tasks are still there, which is awesome. to make extra sure that we're actually reading from the file, what you can do is actually try adding in some log statements to make sure that, save items is actually being called and load items actually being called. Now let's actually try deleting a task. Let's try deleting make dinner, and let's try relaunching an app to see that this change persisted. Great, so now after we deleted the make dinner task item, we don't see it in our list anymore after we relaunch the app. So we implemented a way to save what happens in our app by reading and writing to a file. And in future assignments, we're going to learn about different ways to persist data. But hopefully, by the end of this video, you have a fully functioning to-do app where you can see a list of items. You can let the user enter a specific task they want to add to the list. There's a button that they can use. Long clicking on a specific item should let them remove the item from the list. And the bonus part is that now all this is persisted into a file that we then read and write from in order to save everything that the user is doing. So this is the end of the assignment walkthrough. There are still some bonus features. I definitely encourage you to check out the bonus features if you have time. But this is the end of all the required features for this specific assignment.